Eros, rescued by agape. Thereupon, charitable love, Christian love, which is agape, appears at last and risen to its full height. It is the expression of being in action, and it is Eros, passionate love, pagan love, that spread through the European world the poison of an idealistic ascesis, all that Nietzsche unjustly lays at the door of Christianity. And it is Eros, not agape, that glorified our death instinct and sought to idealize it. But agape has got its own back by rescuing Eros. For agape is incapable of destruction and does not even wish to destroy what destroys. Quote, I desire not the death of a sinner, but that he may live, end of quote. The god Eros is the slave of death because he wishes to elevate life above our finite and limited creature state. Hence, the same impulse that leads us to adore life thrusts us into its negation. There lies the profound woe and despair characterizing Eros, his inexpressible bondage, and in making this bondage evident, agape has delivered Eros from it. Agape is aware that our terrestrial and temporal life is unworthy of adoration and even of being killed, but that it can be accepted in obedience to the eternal. For after all, it is here below that our fate is being decided. It is on earth that we must love. In the next world we shall meet, not divinizing night, but the forgiveness of our Creator and Judge. This prospect is one that natural man was unable to imagine. He was condemned to put his faith in Eros, to trust in his most powerful desire, and to expect release through his desire. Yet Eros could lead him but to death, but a man who believes the revelation of agape suddenly beholds the circle broken. Faith delivers him from natural religion. Now he may hope for something. He is aware that there is some other release from sin. And thereupon Eros in turn has been relieved of his fatal office and delivered from his fate. In ceasing to be a god, he ceases to be a demon. Sin, it has been remarked by R. de Pury, is not Eros, but the sublimation of Eros. And he finds his proper place in the provisional economy of creation and of what is human. The pagans could not do otherwise than make Eros into a god. Eros was the most powerful force within them, the most dangerous and the most mysterious, the most deeply bound up with the event of living. All pagan religions deify desire. All seek to be upheld and saved by desire, which is thus instantly transformed into the greatest enemy of life, the seduction of nothingness. But once the Word was made flesh and had spoken to us in human language, we learn the tidings that it is not we who have to deliver ourselves, but God who will deliver us. God who loved man first and came down to him. Salvation is no longer something beyond and ever a little more out of reach during the interminable ascent of desire, the consumer of life. It is here below and is attainable through obedience to the Word. And hence, what have we to fear from desire? It loses its absolute hold over us the moment we cease to deify it. This is attested by the display of fidelity in marriage. For the foundation of this fidelity is an initial refusal on oath to cultivate the illusions of passion, to render them a secret worship, or to expect from them any mysterious intensification of life. I may also indicate how it is so by consideration of something well known. Christianity has asserted the complete equality of the sexes, and this as plainly as possible. St. Paul says, quote, the wife hath not power over her own body, but the husband. And likewise also the husband hath not power of his own body, but the wife. End of quote. That quote makes no sense to me, by the way. Once she is man's equal, woman cannot be man's goal, as Novalis supposed, thereby effecting a revival of courtly mysticism and of the old Celtic tradition. Once she is man's equal, woman cannot be man's goal, yet at the same time she is spared the bestial abasement that sooner or later must be the price of divinizing a creature. But her equality is not to be understood in the contemporary sense of giving rise to rights. It belongs to the mystery of love. It is but the sign and evidence of the victory of agape over Eros. For a truly mutual love exacts and creates the equality of those loving one another. God showed his love for man by exacting that man should be holy even as God is holy. And a man gives evidence of his love for a woman by treating her as a completely human person, not as if she were the spirit of the legend, half goddess, half bacchante, and compound of dreams and sex. And a man gives evidence of his love for a woman by treating her as a completely human person, not as if she were the spirit of the legend, half goddess, half bacchante, and that word is Bacchante, like, bacchanal or Bacchus. A compound of dreams and sex. But from these premises, let us proceed to the concrete psychology of married equality. When a man is faithful to one woman, he looks on other women in quite another way, a way unknown to the world of Eros. Other women turn into persons instead of being reflections or means. This spiritual exercise develops new powers of judgment, self-possession, and respect. Respect, as I use the word here, means that we recognize in a being the fullness of a person. A person, according to Kant's famous definition, quote, "A person is the subject whose actions are imputable," end of quote, is what cannot be used by man as an instrument or thing. The opposite in this of an erotic man, a steadfast man no longer strives to see a woman as merely an attractive or desirable body, as merely an unintended movement or a fascinating expression. He feels as soon as tempted the difficult and serious mystery of an independent alien existence. He realizes that he has been desiring only an illusory or fleeting aspect of what is actually a complete life, and that perhaps this aspect has been but a projection of his own reverie. Thus, temptation recedes, disconcerted, instead of making itself into an obsession, and fidelity is made secure by the clear-sightedness it induces. The sway of the myth is by so much weakened, and although this sway is unlikely ever to be entirely abolished without leaving traces in hearts drugged by images, hearts such as men harbor today, at least it loses its efficacy. The myth no longer determines a person. In other words, it may be said that fidelity secures itself against unfaithfulness by becoming accustomed not to separate desire from love. In other words, it may be said that fidelity secures itself against unfaithfulness by becoming accustomed not to separate desire from love. For if desire travels swiftly and anywhere, love is slow and difficult. Love actually does pledge one for the rest of one's life, and it exacts nothing less than this pledge in order to disclose its real nature. That is why a man who believes in marriage can no longer believe seriously in love at first sight, still less in the irresistible nature of passion. Love at first sight is no doubt a legend that was accredited by Don Juan, as the irresistible nature of passion was earlier accredited to Tristan. Neither the excuse nor the alibi can deceive anyone who does not wish to be deceived because he thinks deception will be to his advantage. They are tropes of a romantic rhetoric and allowable in that form, but only becoming ridiculous if confused with psychological truth. My analysis of the myth has made it plain why people like to believe in irresistibility, which is an alibi invoked by the guilty. I didn't do it, I wasn't there, it was an irresistible power that acted in the stead of my person. That is the pious lie. On the unmistakable connection between passion and lying, I have insisted, pages 46 to 49 and page 167 above. That is the pious lie of a minister of Eros. But what a lot of self-encouragement resides in the word irresistible. As for love at first sight, it is supposed to excuse Don Juan's lapses. All literature invites us to accept it as the sign of a very strongly sensual nature. Don Juan, the man of loves at first sight who led a tempestuous life, passes for a kind of superman or supermale. This is a myth with an indeterminate power hovering over moral contingencies, but we may be confident that it is a product of compensatory dreams. compensating either for an imposed and detested fidelity or for a masochistic jealousy, or for the beginnings of impotence. Indeed, Don Juan's behavior is typical enough of one kind of sexual weakness. It is in a state of general weariness, sexually localized, that the body is led to commit these sudden lapses, not unakin to the puns that obsess a weary mind. But when body and mind are normally vigorous, the chances of love at first sight must be very slender. It would thus seem that monogamy, in making sexual relations normal, becomes the best assurance of pleasure, that is, of the entirely carnal eros, which is not in the least to be deified. I must repeat, however, that arguments of this kind cannot serve as a foundation for the institution of marriage. It is simply a matter of observation that refutes the current fancies which we owe to the Tristan myth and its Don Juan-esque negative. But such reasons are altogether ineffective as regards anyone who prefers the myth and wishes to believe in the revelations of passion. It may be objected that marriage must then be simply the grave of love. But it is, of course, the myth, once again, that suggests this, thanks to its obsession of obstructed love. It would be more accurate to echo Croce and to say that, quote, marriage is the grave of savage love. That's from Benedetto Croce, Etica e Politica. And more often the grave of sentimentality. Savage and natural love is manifested in rape, the evidence of love among all savage tribes. But rape, like polygamy, is also an indication that men are not yet in a stage to apprehend the presence of an actual person in a woman. This is as much as to say that they do not know how to love. Rape and polygamy deprive a woman of her equality by reducing her to sex. Savage love empties human relations of personality. On the other hand, a man does not control himself owing to lack of passion, meaning power of the libido, but precisely because he loves and in virtue of his love will not inflict himself. He refuses to commit an act of violence which would be the denial and destruction of the person. He thus indicates that his dearest wish is for the other's good. His egotism goes round via the other. This, it will be granted, is a notable revolution. And we may now pass beyond that altogether negative and privative statement of Croce's, and at last define marriage as the institution in which passion is contained, not by morals, but by love. 6. Paradoxes of the Western attitude. These few remarks on passion and marriage will have set forth the fundamental antagonism of eros and agape, that is to say, the antagonism of the two religions that are struggling for the upper hand in the West. Seems to me that once we are aware of this antagonism, of its historical and psychological origins, and of the spiritual issues involved, we must feel the need of revising a number of our current opinions in the sphere of morality first and foremost, but in the spheres of culture and philosophy as well. As a conclusion to this work, I need doubtless only state the corrective principle which my inquiry into passion may be said to establish. In the eyes of the Orientals, the outstanding characteristic of the European attitude is the importance it attaches to passionate forces. They regard this as a heritage of Christianity and as the explanation of our strenuousness. And it is true that the three terms, Christianity, passion, and strenuousness, correspond to the three predominant features of the European psyche, so that such opinions seem self-evident. Yet, if the conclusions which I have drawn from my investigation of the courtly myth are accurate, this view of Christian Europe calls for considerable correction. In the first place, it was not Christianity that caused passion to be cultivated. It was a heresy of Eastern origin. This heresy began by spreading in precisely those regions which Christianity had not yet fully evangelized and where pagan cults still flourished in secret. Passionate love is not Christian love, nor even what has been called a Christian byproduct, nor the change of address of a force which Christianity aroused and directed towards God. That's from Leo Ferrero, Desespoir. The problem of passion is admirably defined by this little book and its psychological data. It is rather a byproduct of Manichaeism. More accurately, it became a cult through the collaboration of the Manichaean religion with our most ancient religious beliefs and through the struggle that ensued between heresy and Christian orthodoxy. That is a first important correction. Next, it is imperative to point out that our well-known Western strenuousness has two distinct sources. If the term is intended to refer to our war frenzy, I have shown that historically, this frenzy is connected in the clearest possible manner with passion. Like passion, the taste for war follows on a notion that life should be ardent, a notion which is the mask of a wish for death. It is an inverted strenuousness and self-destructive. But our strenuousness has another aspect, and one not to be connected with passion for a moment. I mean our mechanical genius, which is the reflection of a human attitude the exact opposite of passionate, a faith in the value of created things, of matter, and of the action of the mind upon the visible world. Neither passion nor the heretical faith out of which it sprang could have inspired a belief that the control of nature should be the aim of our lives. Inasmuch as originally this control was held to be a function of the demiurge, and salvation was held to lie precisely in an escape away from this devilish rule. 1. The theory, quote, the theory of the ancients that work is unworthy of a free man recurs in chivalry. End of quote. Henri Pirenne remarks in his Histoire de l'Europe, page 113. We may ask ourselves whether this most striking expression of the restlessness of the European mind has not resulted from a disposition peculiar to our continent, or whether it is not due to some indirect influence of the Christian ambition defined by the apostle as the deliverance of the creature from the bondage of corruption and ambition that may be taken as tending to reestablish the cosmos under the original rule from which sin has caused it to break away. In Europe, the Christian ambition to change the souls and conduct of sinners has given rise to an ambition to transform the human environment, whence comes the myth of revolution, and also the natural environment, whence came the attention bestowed on techniques. But supposing Christianity had been established in India or China 2,000 years ago, would the results there be by now the same? The answer to this question is irrelevant here. It is enough to note that the Christiano-Occidental, or creative, components of European strenuousness have been inspired by a will exactly the opposite of that of passion. What is misleading, and what indeed has produced an inevitable misunderstanding about our contemporary restlessness, is that war and our mechanical genius have been in collusion. When at the French Revolution war became national, it at once needed the assistance of every creative force, and that of mechanical force in particular. Thus did the passion of war become the principal motive power of mechanical research. This has been very obvious since 1915. The truly monstrous combination of the death-dealing and creative forces changed the nature both of war and of our technical genius. Mechanized war got rid of passion and techniques, and becoming lethal were unfaithful to the ambitions with which they had originated. Europe is possibly going to succumb to the fate it has thus prepared for itself. But obviously it is not Christianity, as so many writers allege, that will be responsible for the disaster. The catastrophic spirit in Europe is not Christian. It will be said, what about the apocalypse? But the disasters heralded in the book of Revelation represent our punishment and not our deliverance. It is not death or disincarnation that offers salvation, but the act of grace performed by God. On the contrary, it is Manichaean. That is what those who identify Christianity with Europe commonly overlook. Everything European is not Christian. If therefore Europe were to succumb to its evil genius, it would be through having for too long cultivated the para-Christian or anti-Christian religion of passion. Should we infer that passion has been the Eastern temptation held before Europe? Inasmuch as passion did not spread in our history and culture earlier than the 12th and 13th centuries, and then only thanks to a peremptory impulsion from heresy in southern France, it turns out that our fatal beliefs reached us out of the Near East and Persia, the regions in which unmistakably the heresy first sprang up. Yet the same beliefs did not have the same effects in the East? No doubt, but in the East they were not obstructed and attacked as they were among us. Hence, it has been our dramatic luck to have opposed passion with weapons foredoomed to foster it. Such is the persistent temptation to which we owe our finest creations, but what gives rise to life gives rise also to death. Let merely an accent be displaced and strenuousness changes its sign. We may at least declare that the religious attitude of Europeans and the institution most typical of their morals, marriage, are now at a point where it is possible to behold this displacement of accent upon which everything depends. Unquestionably, a Christianized European differs from an Oriental in that he has the capacity to delve into the particularity of created beings. There lies the real clue to our faithfulness. The wisdom of the East pursues understanding in the progressive abolition of diversity. We, on the other hand, seek the density of being in the distinct person and have constantly explored it more deeply as thus manifested. Quote, the more we understand individual things, the more we understand God, end of quote. Spinoza says. This attitude amounts to defining my West, and likewise the ultimate conditions of fidelity, the person, and marriage, and of the rejection of passion. It assumes the acceptance of diversity, and that our way of taking hold of the concrete is first to accept its limitations. A Christian takes the world as it is and not as he may dream that it is. His creative activity thereupon consists in recapturing in the depth of individual things all the diversity of the created universe. And that is how it happened that man at the Renaissance was called a microcosm. Whatever destroys this essential will or distracts from it must compromise fidelity and furnish passion with new opportunities. It is our life and our death. Hence, the present breakdown of marriage is the least misleading indication of a Western decadence. There are, of course, other indications, and in the most various spheres, the cult of multiplicity, the poetry of escape, the way nationalist passions encroach upon culture, whatever tends to wreck the person. But they are complex and collective happenings, which often elude personal apprehension. The indication given by the breakdown of marriage can be brought home to us, and it warns us quite unmistakably. No other sign is more obvious or more everyday. No other is so fully confirmed within our secret selves. Seven, beyond tragedy. In many respects, this book appears to be the account of a gradual decay. It has insisted on the degradation of the myth, on the breakdown of marriage, on the disparagement of convention and of formal modes, on the extrusion of the passionate frenzy into spheres where it may be in course of encompassing the collapse of civilization. All that is fact, and all that holds out a threat to us. Indeed, it is the more perilous in proportion as we ignore or dispute it. Yet my gradual diagnosis of it has repeatedly yielded glimpses of how it might be overcome. For instance, it may be that Europe, after a crisis of totalitarianism, and assuming, not amusing. For instance, it may be that Europe, after a crisis of totalitarianism, and assuming that this is not fatal, will recover the significance of a fidelity that is secured by substantial institutions to the person's measure. Perhaps the very excesses of passion will excite a reaction in the guise of new formal modes, and there will thus be set up a new classical age. After all, however, is not this anxious concern over the morrow, now lining so many brows, another of the temptations of passion? Our lives are not staked in the temporal beyond, but in the decisions establishing our faithfulness that must always be taken in the present. Whatever may befall, hap or mishap, the fate of the world matters much less to us than does an understanding of our immediate duties. Quote, "For the fashion of this world passeth away," end of quote. But our vocation is always hic et nunc, in that act performed by the eternal, thanks to which we grasp our hope